Video games are super expensive to make nowadays thanks to advancements in graphics, engines, licensing fees, and so on and so forth. But what happens when a company makes a game and doesn't think that it will be good enough to make up the development costs? Do they rework certain levels, maybe start again from scratch, or do they take the easy way out and just lie about what the game contains? Welcome everybody to Trending10, Nemo here, and today we're going to be looking at 10 times game developers lied in order to sell more copies. Now, just to be clear, the games on this video don't necessarily have to be bad, although many of them kind of are. But the developers clearly knew they weren't going to meet expectations and decided to fib about what buyers were actually getting rather than to be upfront about the game's shortcomings. Now, to start this list off at the number 10 spot, we got Duke Nukem Forever. I'm sure everyone here is aware of what made this game so famous. Not because it was good or awesome, but rather because it was so bad after nearly 15 years in development. Duke Nukem Forever was delayed countless times with the constant reassurance from the developers that it would be worth the wait, and the delays were so that they could add more awesomeness to it. Well, when Duke Nukem Forever finally launched, it was shockingly bad thanks to its outdated graphics, terrible textures, bad physics, boring gameplay, awful vehicle sections. We can go on and on forever about what's wrong with this game. Sure, after 15 years in development hell, we can't really say that anyone expected this to be great, but the developers' constant reassurance of it being worth the wait is what lands it a spot on this list. Number 9, we have Call of Duty Ghosts. This 2013 entry in the Call of Duty franchise gets a hard time from the community thanks to its multitude of shortcomings. But perhaps the reception wouldn't have been so bad if Infinity Ward and Activision hadn't misled the player base so much leading up to its launch. Ghost was the first game in the series to be released on Xbox One and PlayStation 4, so players were excited to see what a massive franchise would do with the new technology. Activision and Infinity Ward stated time and time again that Ghost would be an amazing and new experience with breathtaking visuals pushing Call of Duty into the next generation. Well, when Ghost came out, it definitely wasn't that. The game felt outdated thanks to its average graphics, engine, and gunplay. Not to mention the poor gun balance and map design in the multiplayer. Ghost definitely was not a Call of Duty step in the right direction, but rather just a rehash of previously used elements. Although I do have to say, Call of Duty Ghosts had a pretty awesome campaign, and I can't really hate on them for that. It was pretty good. Number 8, we have Metal Gear Solid 2. After the hugely successful and now legendary first Metal Gear Solid game, a sequel was put into production. When the first trailer dropped, gamers around the world were hyped out of their minds. But something was definitely strange once they finally got their hands on it and put it into their PS2s. While the first few missions were spent controlling Snake, the story suddenly puts you into the shoes of Raiden, who you are stuck with for the rest of the game. This was very surprising and upsetting to players, as the trailer had suggested that the whole game had you play in Snake's shoes, and even showed some of Raiden's sequences with Snake in the place of him. When asked about the trailer, director Hideo Kojima stated that the trailer had been intentionally misleading because he didn't think people would buy the game if they had known Raiden was the main character. This led to Konami making Snake the main focus of the game, despite his part in the story being very small. That's definitely a shady tactic to try to sell a game. But for some reason, I still kind of blame Konami. Number 7, we have Killzone II. Back at E3 2005, the battle between Microsoft and Sony was in full swing, as the two companies were trying to show off their upcoming consoles, the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. Microsoft had a lot going for them thanks to Halo and the newly announced Gears of War. But Sony was really desperate for a killer app to sell the PlayStation 3. This led to them showing off a completely misleading and completely fake trailer for the upcoming shooter Killzone II. The trailer looked incredible, no doubt, and Sony insisted that it was real in-game footage, but it was soon revealed that the trailer was actually just a CGI cutscene meant to look like gameplay. Even after the truth came out, Sony continued to state that the trailer was real gameplay all the way up until the release, and while it still looked good for the time, it was nowhere near what was shown at E3. Number 6, we have Titanfall. After a massive legal battle with Activision following the release of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 and their refusal to pay the developers royalties, 46 Infinity Ward employees resigned and signed on with Respawn Entertainment, a new company founded by Vince Zampella and Jason West, the ex-heads of Infinity Ward, who had been fired for breach of contract. The team then started working on their new multiplayer FPS, Titanfall, building up to be the Call of Duty killer in an effort to get back at Activision for kind of screwing them. When the game finally released, it was definitely fun for a while, but there was a ton of problems with it. Aside from the campaign being completely terrible and, you know, kind of non-existent, and the limited customization options. The servers were in poor condition as well, and the PC version of the game had no anti-cheat whatsoever, as well as a lack of standard FPS features like custom matches and party privacy. This led to the Titanfall player base dying off pretty quickly, while Call of Duty continued to sell millions and millions of copies each year. Again, we're not saying this is a bad game at all, but to build it up like a Call of Duty killer and to release it with such a lack of content was pretty shady. Although the second Titanfall is really good. It's amazing. If you haven't played Titanfall 2, I strongly recommend it. They pretty much fixed everything wrong with Titanfall 1. Number 5, we have Thief, released in 2014. Thief was a stealth game and a reboot of the series of the same name. The earlier Thief games are cult classics known for their high difficulty and complicated controls, forcing you to be extremely strategic with your approaches to the levels. When the reboot was announced, fans of the series were very concerned, as many rebooted franchises end up dumbing down the gameplay in order to bring new players. Square Enix assured the players that this game was going to be just like the classics, and that gamers should be ready for an insane challenge. When Thief was released, however, it was nothing like that at all. The game was extremely easy and much simpler than the original game, and to be honest, it wasn't very good at all due to the uninteresting story and very simple map design. Number 4, we have Mass Effect Andromeda. Leading up to the release of this game, it seemed like BioWare was going to have another hit on their hands, but after the release, it seemed like Andromeda was just made out of reused assets of Mass Effect 1. Leading up to its release, BioWare hyped up Andromeda like crazy, stating that it was going to be an amazing new Mass Effect experience, and that just as much time and care had gone into it as the previous titles. When it came out, this was obviously not the case. The voice acting was bad, the graphics were subpar, the animations were laughable, it was insanely buggy, and the whole thing felt amateurish, like it had been developed in less than a year. Sure, it's not a terrible game, but when you take into account that Mass Effect Andromeda had a $100 million budget and was in development for almost 5 years, it really gets frustrating. I mean, what were they doing with all that money and time? Why did they hype this game up when it was clearly not what you told us fans to expect? Number 3, we have Watch Dogs. You know things are bad when a company shows off a trailer that doesn't represent the final product. You know things are really bad when a company does that and bribes critics in order to get higher scores. Released in 2014, Watch Dogs was sort of a more high-tech version of Grand Theft Auto, giving you an open world with the ability to hack into much of the game's environment. However, it was heavily criticized by gamers for its boring plot, uninteresting characters, and countless technical issues, as well as the fact that the game looked nothing like the demo shown off at E3 2012. The E3 2012 demo of Watch Dogs showed off a beautiful world with stunning graphics, an awesome UI, interactive NPCs, and smooth gameplay. The final release, however, was a bland, buggy, and seemingly unfinished game, leading many to accuse Ubisoft of false advertising, as it was clear that the build of the game released to the public was clearly not built to show off in the E3 demo. Gamers were even more angered when it became known that Ubisoft had sent out many critics free Nexus 7 tablets as if to try to bump up the game's score in order to make up for the bait and switch of the E3 demo. Number 2, we have Mass Effect 3, one of the biggest gaming controversies of the 21st century. Mass Effect 3 takes our number 2 spot on this list due to its atrocious ending and broken promises from BioWare. Mass Effect 1 and 2 were big hits, both critically and commercially acclaimed, and are considered by many to be some of the best sci-fi RPGs ever made. One of the main aspects of the Mass Effect games was its multitude of choices the player would have to make, each of which contributing to the overall outcome of the story, which added more replayability and made the player feel like they were really contributing to the game's universe. Leading up to the release of Mass Effect 3, BioWare stated countless times that the ending was going to be amazing and that it would be taking into account choices made by the player throughout all 3 games. They even explicitly said that they hated when other RPGs do generic A, B, or C endings, and that Mass Effect 3 would not be that. Well, unfortunately, Mass Effect 3's ending was exactly that. None of the choices made in previous games were taken into account, and really neither were those made in the 3rd game either. Mass Effect 3's ending was bland and only served to open up plot holes and anger gamers who felt that they had been lied to. Because, well, they kind of were. BioWare quickly released a DLC expansion to try to fix the ending, but the damage had already been done. At the number 1 spot, we have No Man's Sky, renamed by gamers as No Man's Lie. This 2016 release went down in gaming history as one of the worst and most controversial advertising campaigns ever made. And lead designer Gareth Bourne, as well as Sean Murray, the creator of No Man's Sky, went on countless interviews and talked on and on many times on social media and at events about features that were nowhere to be found when the game finally came out. The hype leading up to No Man's Sky release was insane, some of the biggest for any game in the last few years. The only problem was that players were getting hyped for a game that didn't actually exist. Some of the biggest complaints from gamers included not being able to see others in the world, the repetitive nature of the gameplay, the lack of satisfying endgame, constant crashes and stability issues, and lack of multiplayer. All of which Bourne and Murray stated would not be the case. The game was just a bundle of lies and cons from developers in order to sell as many copies as possible and capitalize on the hype of gamers who are excited for something new and exciting. While we can give credit to the developers as they are still supporting the game to this day and doing their best to get it to the point that they promised it would be at, the player base is incredibly small, and I doubt anybody will be able to take another release from Hello Games seriously after this controversy. Guys, that pretty much wraps it up with this list. Let me know what you thought of it in the comment section below. Which one on this list was your favorite or most disliked game? And also, guys, do me a favor, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn your post notifications on. And until next time, it's been Nemo, and I'll talk to you guys on the next one.